We called him the rake. Not to his face. We weren't quite brave enough for that, and anyway he never gave us the satisfaction of hearing it. But among ourselves in the long boredom of the barracks, that was his name. The rake. The old man with the wheelbarrow and the bent back and the gray coat the color of wet stone, who shuffled the gravel paths of the Graythorn yard at dawn, and trimmed the box hedges at noon, and was, as far as any of us 19-year-olds could tell, the single most useless human being attached to the King's regiment. I am ashamed of that now. I want you to understand how ashamed, because the shame is the whole reason I am telling this at all. But to tell it honestly, I have to take you back to the boy I was, and that boy thought the old groundskeeper was a joke. We all did, and the morning everything turned, I was laughing harder than anyone. My name is Aldrich Vane. I was a recruit of the Iron Watch in my first spring at Graythorn Barracks, which sits below the King's summer house in the reach of the Calderwood, and if you had asked me that spring what made a man worth respecting, I'd have given a simple answer. A man was worth respecting if he could be seen to matter, if he wore the red, if he stood the line. That was greatness to me. Greatness was a thing you could see. So you can understand why the rake meant nothing to me. He could not be seen. He was the gray smudge at the edge of every photograph, the one nobody framed. He moved slowly. He spoke to no one. He kept a little shed behind the eastern wall where the tools were, and a kettle, and a single chair, and he took his lunch alone on a bench by the rose beds with his back to the parade ground, as though the whole splendid machine of us were a thing he had no part in. Which, we all agreed, he didn't. The first time I ever spoke to him, I was carrying a complaint. It was a cold morning in the second week, the kind of Calderwood cold that gets into the buckles, and I had been set to the worst duty a recruit can draw, which is the dawn sweep of the lower court before the gates open. Sergeant Holt had told me the gravel had to be raked smooth, and even by the time the colors went up, every furrow running the same way, no boot scars, no puddles disturbing the pattern, because the King's summer house received visitors in the warm months, and the lower court was the first thing of visitors' eye fell on. I had been at it an hour. My hands were raw, and the gravel, which I had raked into what I considered perfectly handsome rows, refused to look the way it was supposed to look. There were ridges, there were little drifts where the rake had piled the stone. From a low angle it was a mess. I was standing over it furious, when a shadow fell beside mine. "You're fighting it," the old man said. I jumped. I hadn't heard him come. He had a way of being suddenly present that I would learn was not stealth, exactly, but stillness. He simply didn't make the noise the rest of us made just by existing. He was looking at my gravel, not at me, and his face had the patient, unbothered expression of a man watching weather. "I'm raking it," I said, same as I was told. "You're dragging it," he said. "There's a difference." He held out one hand, palm up, the way you'd ask for a tool, and because I was 19 and angry and wanted the problem to belong to someone else, I gave him the rake. He turned it over in his hands once. Then he set the head down at the far edge and drew it toward himself, slow, his whole body moving with it, his back straight for the first time I had ever seen, and the gravel came up behind the tines in a single clean wave, level as poured water, the furrows fine and even and all running true. He took 3 strokes. 3. And a patch I had been wrestling for 10 minutes lay perfect. "Wrists too tight," he said, handing the rake back. "You're trying to make it a bay. Let it find the level. It wants to be flat. You only have to let it." And he turned and shuffled off toward the rose beds with his hands behind his back, and I stood there holding the rake and feeling, for one strange, unwelcome moment, like a child who has been corrected by someone who knows. I should have remembered that moment. The way his back came straight. The way 3 strokes did what my 10 could not. But I was 19, and the feeling embarrassed me, and the way a 19-year-old kills an embarrassing feeling is to make it small. So by the time I got back to the barracks, I had turned it into a story about a peculiar old man with peculiar opinions about gravel, and the others laughed, and I laughed, and the rake went back to being the rake. That was the spring I learned to mock him properly. It became a kind of sport in the recruit dormitory, the way cruelty often does, almost without anyone deciding on it. Someone would do the walk, the slow, bent shuffle, hands behind the back, the head tilted as if listening to a hedge. Someone would do the voice, low and unhurried. Let it find the level, lad. We invented a whole life for him, a foolish one, full of conversations with snails and a deep secret romance with his kettle. When his wheelbarrow squeaked across the far end of the yard during drill, half the back rank would mouth squeak in time with it, and Corporal Reeve, who should have stopped us, only hid a smile. The worst of us was Tomas Pell, and I say that knowing I was the second worst, and that the difference between first and second worst is no difference a decent man would bother to measure. Pell was big and quick and good at everything the regiment measured, which is a dangerous combination in a young man, because it teaches him that the things the regiment measures are the only things worth being good at. He could not abide the old man. Something about that gray, indifferent figure who would not look at us, who took no pride in the splendor we were so proud of, got under Pell's skin like a splinter. "He thinks he's better than us," Pell said one evening, watching the old man cross the darkening yard with his barrow. "You see it, won't even look, sweeps his little paths like the king put him in charge of the world. He spat into the gutter. He's a servant. He should act like one." "He's just old," I said. "I'd like to tell you I said it to defend the man. I didn't. I said it because contradicting Pell, even a little, was the closest thing to courage I had that season, and it cost me nothing." "Old men can show respect," Pell said. "My grandfather was old. He'd have stood up when an officer passed. That one," he jerked his chin at the gray shape, "that one wouldn't cross the road for the king himself. He's nothing vain, worse than nothing. He's nothing that thinks it's something. And the awful thing, the thing I have to set down plainly because it is the truth, is that I agreed with him. I looked at the old man crossing the yard in the last light, his barrow squeaking, his head tilted toward his hedges, and I thought, yes, nothing that thinks it's something. I was 19, and I had decided that a man's worth was a thing you could see, and I could not see his, and so I had concluded he had none. I want to stop here and tell you what I did not know, because you ought to carry it with you through the rest of this, the way I wish I had carried it. I did not know that the old man's name was Sergeant Garrick Thorne. I did not know that 40 years before, in a war the history books of our fictional realm now call the Hollow Campaign, a sergeant of that name had carried a wounded lieutenant 9 miles through the broken country above the Calder Gorge, with the enemy behind them and the cold ahead, and had not put him down, and had not let him die, though by every reckoning both of them should have. I did not know that the lieutenant had lived, and risen, and that there was now a man with 3 stars on his shoulder and the whole Northern command at his back who said, to anyone who would listen, and many who would rather not, that he owed every hour of his life since that march to one sergeant who would not quit. I did not know that the old man with the rake had once been the strongest, hardest, most decorated soldier any of those officers had ever served beside, and that he had walked away from all of it the day the war ended, asked for no medals he had earned, taken no rank he was offered, and gone looking for the quietest work he could find. I did not know he had chosen the gravel and the hedges, that a man can choose to be invisible. I knew none of that. I knew only that the tourists never filmed him, and so, to me, he did not count. The morning it all came apart began like any other. It was high summer by then, the Calderwood gone gold and heavy, the season when the king's household moved up to the summer house and the barracks filled with the business of receiving important men. We had been drilling for a week toward a thing the sergeants would only call the inspection, in the way they have of making a thing sound both enormous and none of your concern. A general was coming. That much had leaked. A real one, a field commander from the northern frontier, and he was coming to review the Iron Watch and to lay a wreath at the regiment's memorial on the anniversary of some old battle, and everything, every buckle, Every blade of grass, every stone of the lower court had to be perfect. Which is how I came to be back in the lower court at dawn, raking gravel, with Pell beside me, the two of us assigned together because Holt had decided we were both in need of humbling, and that humbling was best done on our knees in the cold with a rake. And which is how the old man came to be there too. He was at the eastern beds when we arrived, on his knees among the roses, doing something gentle and slow to the soil that I did not understand and did not care to. The light was just coming gray over the wall. Pell saw him first and groaned. "Of course," he muttered. "Of course he's here. Can't have one morning without him creeping about." "Leave it," I said. I was tired and cold and wanted only to get the gravel done. "Just do the rows." But Pell was in a foul mood, the special foul mood of a young man who has been told he needs humbling and has decided in his heart that the people who told him so are wrong. He worked the far half of the court in hard, savage strokes, the gravel piling and scarring under his rake, and every few minutes he would straighten up and look over at the old man among the roses and his mouth would tighten. "Hey," he called at last across the court. "Rake." The old man did not look up. "Rake," Pell said again louder, "I'm talking to you." Sergeant Thorne, though I did not know his name was Thorne, though I did not know he had a name at all beyond the one we'd given him, sat back on his heels and looked over. His face was the same as always, patient, unbothered, a man watching weather. "The general's coming today," Pell said. He said it the way a boy says a thing he thinks will frighten someone. "Big man, Northern Command. He's going to walk this court. So whatever it is you do over there with your flowers, you'd best keep clear of the path when the real soldiers are working. Understand?" I expected the old man to nod, or to mumble, or simply to turn back to his roses, which is what he always did. Instead he looked at Pell for a long moment, and then he looked at the court, at Pell's half of it, the scarred and piled and ridged half, and something almost like sorrow crossed his face. Not anger, sorrow, as if he were seeing something fail that did not have to. "You're dragging it," he said quietly, "same as the other boy did in the spring." That was me, the other boy. I felt my ears go hot. "You'll want to let it find the level," the old man went on, not unkindly, almost gently. "A general's eye goes to the floor first in a court like this. He won't say so, but it does. If the stone's not true, the whole court reads wrong to him and he won't know why, and he'll think less of every man standing in it. So if I were—" "Did I ask you?" Pell's voice cracked across the court like a whip. "Did I ask the gardener how to lay a parade ground? Did I?" He came striding over, the rake still in his fist, his face dark with the particular fury of a young man being instructed by someone he has decided is beneath him. "You sweep the leaves. You trim the bushes. That is what you are for. That is all you are for. So you keep your opinions on the dirt where they belong, and you keep that bent old back out of my court, because I have had—" He was close to the old man now, standing over him where he knelt among the roses. "I have had just about enough of you shuffling around acting like you matter. I should have stopped it. I want to be very clear in the telling about exactly where I was and what I did, because it would be easy to make myself the one who didn't laugh, the quiet one at the edge who knew better. I was not that one. I was standing 10 feet away with my rake in my hands, and when Pell stood over the kneeling old man and told him he didn't matter, I laughed. A short, ugly, nervous laugh, and the old man heard it. His eyes flicked to me, just for a moment, just long enough, and there was nothing in them but that same quiet sorrow, and I have spent years trying to forget the way it felt to be looked at like that and to have earned it. "He doesn't matter," Pell said, turning to me, grinning now, fed by the laugh. "Say it, Vane, tell the rake what he is." And God help me, I almost did. The word was in my mouth. Nothing. I was 19 and a coward, and the cruelty was warm and easy and shared, and the word was right there. What stopped me was the bell. The watch bell up at the gatehouse rang the half hour, and from beyond the wall came the long rolling crunch of wheels on gravel, many wheels, moving in order, and a horn, and the sudden electric stiffening of the whole barracks coming to attention at once, the sound of 300 men remembering all at the same instant that they were soldiers. The general's column had reached the outer gate. He was early. Pell forgot the old man in a heartbeat, so did I. We dropped our rakes against the wall and ran for our places, hearts hammering, because to be caught out of position when a field commander entered the court was the kind of mistake that followed a recruit for years. We formed up on the eastern side with the rest of the Iron Watch, the lines dressing and redressing, Sergeant Holt's voice low and savage as he straightened us, and as I locked my eyes to the front and froze my face the way we'd been taught, I had exactly one thought about the old groundskeeper, and the thought was, I hope he's gone. I hope he had the sense to clear off. He'll ruin the whole picture if the general sees a gardener standing in the court. He had not gone. I could see him from the corner of my eye, where I was not supposed to be looking. He had risen from the roses and dusted the soil from his knees, slow, methodical, in no hurry at all. And he had picked up his own rake, the good one, the worn one, his, and he had begun, calmly, to repair Pell's ruined half of the court. Long, even, true strokes, the gravel coming up flat behind him in that single clean wave, working backward toward the eastern wall, mending the scars and the ridges and the piled drifts so that by the time the great doors at the far end of the court swung open, the floor the general's eye would go to first, just as the old man had said, lay smooth and level and perfect, every furrow running true. He did not do it for praise. There was no one to praise him. He did it because the court was wrong and he knew how to make it right, and that, I would come to understand, was the whole of the man. He made things right and asked nobody to notice. Then the doors opened, and the general came in, and the old man stepped quietly back against the eastern wall to be out of the way, his rake in his hand, and lowered his head, and became, once more, a gray smudge at the edge of the picture. The general's name, we would learn, was Aldous Marrow, commander of the northern frontier, and he came into the lower court the way such men come into rooms, without hurry, without display, and yet with the whole space arranging itself around him before he had taken 3 steps. He was perhaps 60, broad and weathered, his coat dark blue and heavy with the quiet kind of decorations that mean a man has actually done the things the medals stand for. 2 aides flanked him. Behind came the colonel of our barracks, Colonel Ferris, walking a half-pace back in the manner of a host who badly wants everything to go well. We held, 300 of us frozen, eyes front, the only sound the general's boots and the murmur of Ferris naming things, the memorial, the wall, the history of the watch. General Marrow moved down the line slowly. He stopped now and then to ask a man his name, his county, how long he'd served, and each time the man answered in the high, tight voice of a recruit who cannot believe a general is looking at him, and Marrow nodded and moved on. He reached the eastern side. He reached Pell. Name, Marrow said. Recruit Tomas Pell, sir, Pell said, and I have to give him this, his voice did not shake. Whatever else he was not a coward in front of power. Power was the one thing he understood. Marrow looked at him a moment. Looked, I thought, a little longer than he had looked at the others, as though something in the boy's bright, hard face interested him, and not in a way Pell would have liked. Then his eyes moved past Pell's shoulder and stopped. I felt the change before I understood it. You feel these things in a formation, the way you feel a draft. Something had taken the general's attention completely, and the something was not us. The general had gone still. I have stood in formations through cannon and storm and the long terror of waiting, and I have never felt a silence like the one that came down over the lower court of Graythorn in the next few seconds. The general was not looking at Pell anymore. He was not looking at any of us. He was looking past the end of our line, at the gray figure against the eastern wall, the old man with the rake and the bent back and the lowered head, the smudge at the edge of the picture, and his weathered face had changed in a way I did not have the years yet to read. It had gone open, young, almost, uncertain, in a man who plainly had not been uncertain about anything in 30 years. "Sir," Colonel Ferris said quietly at his shoulder, "is something." The general did not answer him. He left the line. I want you to understand how wrong that was, how completely outside the order of things. A general reviewing a formation does not leave the formation. The formation is the point. He walks the line holds, the world is a known shape. But General Aldous Marrow turned his back on 300 soldiers standing rigid for his inspection, and walked across the open court toward the eastern wall, toward the groundskeeper, and his 2 aides looked at each other and did not know whether to follow, and Colonel Ferris took one step and stopped, and the whole barracks held its breath and watched a field commander walk away from us toward a man who swept paths. The old man heard him coming. Of course he did. He always heard everything. He lifted his head. And I watched the 2 of them see each other. I was close enough, 5th from the end of the line, my eyes locked front but my whole soul straining sideways, that I could see the old man's face when the general's shadow fell across him, and I will tell you that the thing that happened in that face was not surprise. It was recognition, yes. But underneath the recognition was something heavier and older and more tired, the look of a man who has spent 40 years hoping a particular thing, will never find him, and has just watched it walk across a courtyard to do exactly that. "It's you," the general said. His voice carried in the silence. It was not the parade voice. It was low and rough at the edges, and it shook just slightly the way a deep thing shakes. The old man said nothing. He set his rake against the wall, slowly, carefully, the way he did everything, and he straightened. And there it was again, the thing I had seen once in the spring and made into a joke. The bent back coming straight, the gray shuffling stranger standing suddenly to his full height, taller than I had ever known he was, and for one impossible second the old groundskeeper of Graythorn looked like a soldier. "General Marrow," he said, "you've done well for yourself." "Don't," Marrow said, the word came out cracked. "Don't you stand there and—" He stopped. He pressed his lips together hard, a big weathered man fighting something down, and when he spoke again it was almost a whisper, but the court was so silent that every one of us heard it. "9 miles, he said. "You carried me 9 miles, Garrick, above the gorge, with the cold coming and them behind us. I told you to put me down. I ordered you to put me down. Do you remember what you said?" The old man's jaw worked. For the first time since I had known him, the patient, unbothered weather of his face broke, and something moved underneath it. "I remember," he said. "You said," the general's voice failed him. He tried again. "You said, 'With respect, sir, I don't take orders about my own back.'" A sound came out of Marrow then that was half a laugh and half something else entirely, the sound a strong man makes when 40 years of a thing he has carried alone suddenly has someone to share it. I have told that story to every officer I ever trained. Everyone. I have said, "There was a sergeant once, the best soldier I ever knew, and he carried me out of a place no one comes out of, and he never let me fall, and when it was over he asked for nothing, no medal, no rank, nothing, and he walked away, and I never found him. 20 years I had men looking. 20 years. And you?" He looked around at the court, at the roses, at the rake against the wall, and something broke fully open in his face. "You were raking gravel." "It's good work," the old man said simply. "I like the quiet." And then General Aldous Marrow, commander of the northern frontier, with 300 soldiers and a colonel and the whole pride of the Iron Watch frozen and watching, did the thing I will see in my mind until the day I die. He stepped back 1 pace. He squared his shoulders, and he brought his hand up, slow and certain and exact, the cleanest salute I have ever seen a man give, and he held it. A general, saluting a gardener, held it, his arm trembling very slightly with the weight of all the years in it, and his eyes wet, and his jaw set, and he held it the way you hold a salute for the dead and for the great, and he said, in a voice that carried to the last man in the last rank, Sergeant Garrick Thorne, it is the honor of my life to see you again." Nobody moved, nobody breathed. I stood in the line with my eyes locked front and the world tilting around me, and the only sound in all of Graythorne was a single bird somewhere up in the limes, and the salute held, and held, and the old man, the rake, the gray smudge, the nothing that thought it was something, looked at the general for a long moment with that broken open tiredness in his face. And then his own back came the rest of the way straight, all the way, the parade straight, the way a body remembers across 40 years, and he raised his old soil-dark hand and returned it, sharp and true, and the two of them stood there in the perfect gravel he had laid, the general and the sergeant, and held the salute between them like two ends of the same unbreakable thing. I heard, very faintly, beside me, the sound of Tomas Pell beginning to understand what he had done. The salute came down. Both hands fell at the same moment, as though some old shared rhythm still ran between the two men after 40 years apart. And then General Marrow, who a minute before had been the most powerful man any of us had ever stood near, reached out and took the old groundskeeper by the shoulders with both hands, the way you take hold of a brother. And for a moment the commander of the northern frontier simply held on, his head bowed, and the old man let him. "They told me you died," Marrow said, very low. "After the war. Someone said the cold had taken you that winter. I lit a candle for you every year. 40 candles, Garrick. And you've been an hour's ride from the capital the whole time, pulling weeds." "I wasn't hiding from you," the old man said. "I want you to know that. I wasn't hiding from anyone. I'd had enough of being looked at was all. I'd had enough of being the man in the story. I just wanted to make a few small things right and have nobody make a fuss of it." A faint, tired smile touched the corner of his mouth. "I see I've made a fuss of it now." "You've made a fuss of it now," Marrow agreed, and laughed, that broken half-laugh again, and wiped his face with the flat of his hand without any shame at all, in front of all of us, because a man like that does not care who sees him weep over a thing like this. Then the general remembered where he was. He turned all the way around slowly and looked at us, 300 soldiers of the Iron Watch, frozen in our lines, our perfect splendid lines, our buckles bright and our faces stone, the picture we were all so proud of being. And I watched his eyes move down the formation, and I felt each of them pass over me like a cold hand, and they came to rest finally on the eastern end of the line, on Pell, and on me beside him. "You too," the general said. "We did not move. You do not move. But I have never in my life wanted so badly to be invisible, I who had spent a whole spring deciding that being invisible was the worst thing a man could be. Step forward." We stepped forward. 2 paces, the way we'd been taught, and stood there in the open court with the whole barracks watching and the perfect gravel under our boots. His gravel, the gravel the old man had laid smooth not 20 minutes after Pell had told him he didn't matter. "I was watching the court when I came in," Marrow said. His voice was quiet now, and that was worse than if he had shouted. A shout you can stand against. The quiet got in under your guard. An old habit. You learn in the field that a man tells you everything about himself in the small things, how he keeps his kit, how he treats the people he thinks can't help him. So I watch. And what I saw, gentlemen, before I saw an old friend, was 2 recruits standing over a kneeling old man, and one of you telling him he didn't matter. He let that sit in the air. Which of you was it? The silence stretched, and then Pell, and this is the one thing I will always give Tomas Pell, the one decent thing Pell said, "It was me, sir." He was only, a glance at me, he was only standing there. "It was me. I said it." He did not have to do that. He could have let me share it. I had laughed. I had been half a step from saying the word myself. But he took it, the whole weight of it, and stood there with his bright hard face gone pale and waited for it to fall on him. "You said it," Marrow repeated. "Yes, sir." The general looked at him for a long, long moment. And then he did something I did not expect, something I have thought about more than almost anything else from that day. He did not destroy Pell. He had every power to. One word from a man like that and Pell's life in the regiment was over, and we all knew it, and Pell knew it best of all. Instead, the general turned and he looked at the old man and he said, "Garrick, this is your court. Your work is in this ground. What would you have me do with him?" And the old man, the man Pell had stood over and shamed not an hour before, looked at the white-faced boy for a while, and then he said, "I'd have you do nothing to him, General. He's 19. I was a great deal worse than him at 19, and you know it because you were there." A thin smile. "He thinks worth is a thing you can see. Most of them do at that age." His eyes moved along our frozen ranks, gentle, almost fond, taking in all our splendid certainty. "It isn't his fault. It's only a thing nobody's taught him yet, so don't break him for it, teach him." Marrow nodded slowly, as if this were exactly the answer he had expected, and had perhaps walked across the court to receive. "You hear that?" the general said, turning back to Pell to me. "He's just saved your career. The man you told didn't matter. You'll want to remember that, both of you." His eyes came to me and held, and I understood that he had not been fooled for 1 second by my standing there saying nothing. "Both of you," he said again, softer. "I know a laugh when I hear one, son. Stillness isn't the same as innocence. Sometimes the man at the edge who says nothing is the worst one in the picture, because he knew better and chose the easy, warm thing anyway. Don't be that man. It's a long, small life being that man." I have never been struck so hard by anyone in my life, and he never raised a hand or his voice. "Sir," I said, "it was all I had." "Get back in your line," he said, not unkindly, and we did. And my face was burning and my eyes were stinging, and I locked them front and stood as still as I had ever stood. And inside I was 19 years old and falling a very long way. The general was not finished. He walked back to the center of the court where everyone could see him, and he stood beside the old man, not in front of him, beside him, which I noticed and have never forgotten, and he addressed the whole of the Iron Watch. "I came here to review you," he said, "to lay a wreath at your memorial and look at your buckles and tell your colonel you've a fine regiment, which you have. That was the day I planned, but I find I'd rather spend it differently if you'll let an old man change his plans." He put one hand on the groundskeeper's shoulder. "I'd rather tell you who this is, because not one of you knows, and that is a sin, and the fault is partly his, for being too proud to be thanked, and partly ours, for thinking a man's worth is written on his coat." He told them about the Hollow Campaign, about the high broken country above the Calder Gorge, about the night a young lieutenant took a wound that should have ended him and lay in the cold certain he was going to die there alone. He told them about the sergeant who would not allow it. 9 miles. No stretcher, no help, no light. A grown man across his back and the enemy behind, and the sergeant putting one foot in front of the other through a night that lasted, the general said, longer than any other night of his life, and stopping only once near the end, to slap the lieutenant awake when the cold tried to take him, and to say, and here the general's voice went rough again, "Stay with me, sir. You don't get to leave. I haven't carried you this far to bury you a mile from home." He told them about the medals the sergeant was offered and refused, the rank refused, the way he had simply gone when it was over, the way smoke goes, and how the lieutenant, now a general, had spent 20 years trying to find him, and had finally, grieving, given him up for dead. "And he was here," Marrow said. "He was raking your gravel, he was trimming your hedges. He laid the floor you're standing on this morning, after one of you told him he was nothing, laid it true and level and perfect, and asked no one to notice, which is the only kind of greatness I have ever truly respected." He looked around at us, slow, man by man. "You want to know what a soldier is? You think it's this." He gestured at our splendid lines, our red, our brass. "It isn't. This is the picture of a soldier. That," he pointed at the old man, at the bent gray groundskeeper standing straight now in the center of the court, "that is the thing the picture is supposed to be of, and most of you would have walked past it your whole careers." I stood in the line and I wept without moving. the tears running down a face I held perfectly still. The discipline they had drilled into me put to the only honest use I had ever found for it. All around me I could feel the others doing the same, 300 young men learning, all at once, in the space of a few minutes, the single most important thing they would ever learn, and feeling the shame of it, the clean, necessary shame that changes a man if he lets it. Then the general did one more thing. He asked the old man to lay the wreath. There was a memorial at the north end of the lower court, a plain stone wall cut with the names of the regiment's dead, and the general had come to lay a wreath there on the anniversary, as generals do, but he would not do it. He turned to Sergeant Garrick Thorne and he said, "You knew more of them than I did. You carried more of them than I did. It should be your hand." And he held out the wreath, and the old man looked at it for a long moment with that broken open tiredness in his face, and then he took it. He carried it to the wall the way he carried everything, slowly, carefully, with a kind of attention that made the simple act look like the most important thing in the world, which, for that minute, it was. He laid it at the foot of the stone. He stood. He read the names. I watched his lips move over them, and I understood that they were not names to him the way they were names to us, lines of old letters cut in rock. They were faces. They were men he had known, and some he had carried, and some he had not been able to. He stood there a long time with his head bowed, and 300 soldiers and a general and a colonel stood with him in a silence so deep I could hear the limes moving in the wind. And then the old man lifted his head and brought his old hand up one last time in the cleanest salute, holding it for the men in the wall who could no longer return it. And every one of us, without an order, without a word, brought our hands up with him. I will tell you what I felt, raising my hand beside 300 others in that perfect court. I felt, for the first time since I had put on the red, that I was actually a soldier, not the picture of one, the thing the picture is supposed to be of. And I knew that the man who had made me feel it was the man I had laughed at 3 weeks running, and that there is no shame on this earth quite like the shame of being made better by someone you have been cruel to. The general stayed for 2 days. He spent both evenings in the little shed behind the eastern wall with the kettle and the single chair and his oldest friend, and once or twice we heard them laughing through the wall, 2 old men, and once a long silence that was somehow louder than the laughing. When Marrow left, he left orders, not punishments, orders, that a second chair be put in the shed for the general's visits, which would now be frequent, that the old man's pension be set right quietly, without a word said to him until it was done, because the general knew he would refuse it otherwise. And one more, written in his own hand and pinned to the board in the recruits' dormitory, where it hung for the rest of my years at Graythorne and hangs there still, for all I know. It said, "The lowest task done with honor outranks the highest task done without it. Salute the work, not the coat. A. Marrow, CMDR." We learned, after, to find the old man. It started with Pell, which surprised everyone, including Pell. He went to the shed the very next morning, alone, and I do not know all that was said, but he came back changed, and from that day until he left Graythorne a sergeant himself, he never once passed the old groundskeeper without coming to attention. The rest of us followed, slow and a little sheepish. We carried his barrow up the hill when his back was bad. We asked him about the gravel and the roses and the war, though he would only ever say a little about the war and never the part with the medals in it. We learned, most of all, to look at him, really look, and to understand that the gray smudge at the edge of the picture had been the most important man in it all along, and that the only thing that had ever hidden him was our own certainty that worth must shine. Garrick Thorne raked the paths of Graythorne for another 9 years. He died in the autumn in his sleep in the little room behind the shed, with the kettle cold and the roses he had tended going gold outside the window. General Marrow came for the funeral. He buried his friend with full honors at last. The medals the old man had refused in life laid on the coffin in death, and he gave the eulogy himself, and he was a long time getting through it. The whole regiment came. 3 generations of the Iron Watch, Men the old groundskeeper had quietly made better, standing in the rain with their hands raised, saluting the work and not the coat. I am a sergeant now myself, old by the measure of the boys I drill, though not so old as he was. And when a new recruit comes to me too sure of himself, too certain that worth is a thing you can see, too quick to laugh at the slow and the gray and the overlooked, I do not break him. I take him out to the lower court at dawn, and I put a rake in his hands, and I let him fight the gravel for an hour, and then I tell him about an old man who knew how to make a thing lie true and level without ever once asking to be thanked for it. And I tell him the last thing I ever heard Garrick Thorne say, the spring before he died, when a young guard asked him, kindly, this time, not cruelly, why a man who had done so much had chosen to do so little. The old man leaned on his rake and looked out across the perfect court he had laid 10,000 times, and he said, "Lad, there's no such thing as little work. There's only work the world has forgotten how to see. A man's worth isn't in who's watching, it's in whether the thing's done right when no one is." He drew one slow, true stroke through the gravel, and it came up level as poured water behind him. I learned that carrying a man down a mountain nobody knew about. I've been learning it every morning since. He nodded at the smooth stone. Let it find the level, son. That's the whole of it. You only have to let it. I have spent my whole life trying,